Now, when I was working with Pastor Kelly Schultz, planting the Canmore Church back in 1996, the Lord taught me some wonderful things. And a lot of the things was from the mouth of Pastor Schultz. I remember one time he said that an evangelistic meeting is basically a glorified Bible study. So if you are making efforts to share the gospel with people, maybe the Lord will put you in a position where you can speak out in a Reaping Evangelistic series. So for the rest of this lecture, I'd like to give you some practical advice on reaping evangelism, some thoughts that I've learned over the years that I hope will benefit you if you are ever in a position where you are a speaker leading out in a series of meetings. Basically, there's a thought structure. The way the meetings go, if you've gone through a number of sets of meetings, they always adhere to a certain thought structure. I got this information out of a textbook. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know when it was written, but I don't take credit to it myself. But God showed it to me, so I pass it on to you. All the meetings always start with Christ. Then they focus on Christ's law. Then they focus on Christ's Sabbath. And then they focus on the mark of the beast. They're interlocking chains of truth that center around those four main points. What happens is, as the program develops, it basically comes around full circle twice. You teach the people what the truth is up until the Sabbath message. And then you're spending the rest of the time in the meetings trying to get the people to take a stand for the truths they have been shown. This is why you don't go from a Sabbath lecture right to a Mark of the Beast lecture. You have to have some time in between because people need some time to take it all in. That's where you pad the lecture with the extras. Things like the truth about death, things like health, things like Christian standards, and the spirit of prophecy, things like that. Then you build up again to the Mark of the Beast. That becomes the main conclusion to the lectures. And then, of course, the rest of the meetings are sort of to tie off all the loose ends, shall we say. Again, the reason why people are going to take a stand, because they see there is a difference in false and true Christianity, and they see that born-again Christianity from an Adventist perspective is true Christianity for the last days. So you need to focus on and develop this difference. Once you get up to the Sabbath sermon, the difference needs to be made plain by that point, because that's when the difference will be made plain. Now, you may have had a situation like this in your church. I've seen it a few times. Someone is ready to take a stand for God, but they're still struggling with one particular issue. Say jewelry or smoking. And they come and they say, I'd like to be baptized, but here's my problem. I remember myself making a sort of a great confession to the pastor who shared with me about some of my problems that I didn't think I had victory yet. And all he said was, you know, through Christ you can beat it. He didn't turn around and say, okay, that's it, you're a junior church member, you're on trial, on probation before the church board, and you can't do this and you can't do that until you are better. No, he didn't say that at all. So, again, what will help in a situation like that is if you listen not only to what the person's saying, but how they're saying it. Are they saying, I'm sorry for this problem and I'm struggling and I need help? Then please baptize them. It's the right thing to do. We had a family a few years ago at a church nearby where I live. A family struggling with smoking, wanted to be baptized. It was clear they'd been convicted. They just needed more encouragement. So the church said, okay, you can be baptized. But then a year later, they didn't change according to the church's schedule. And then the church member said, no, you can't be on the nominating committee. You can't hold any positions until you stop smoking. And that did not help them at all. It did not give them any encouragement. It did not give them any loving acceptance. And it really hurt their feelings quite a bit. But on the same token, on the other side, a few years ago, I also saw a situation where a man came and said, I want to be baptized, but I'm not willing to give up my jewelry. And the pastor in question turned and said to him, well, just give up your jewelry for that day and pray about it and see what happens. And of course, the next day he put his jewelry right back on. So because of that, we were rubber stamping him in a wrong decision. And so it wasn't right to baptize him because he showed that he wasn't sorry. So this is the kind of thing you need to look for, is this level of sincerity when you have to face a question like this. because you do not want to treat anybody like they are a junior church member. But on the same token, of course, you don't want to rubber stamp sin and be a permissive, weak, liberal church either. Now, for a lot of people today, they're finding that the whole month-long process of 28 meetings is just too much, is not working for them. Once you understand that format and that structure, that might give you a way to cut the meetings down. Here in the area of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Randy Barber from Calgary Central Seventh-day Adventist Church has been able to have successful meetings with as little as 12 nights. One thing he does is he uses handouts. He gives the message up at the front. Then he hands people handouts. And a lot of times on the handout are things that aren't in the message, but in fact add to the message, prove the message even further in a different way. So he can teach more than just what is in those 12 nights by using the handouts. Now, again, the most important point when you're preaching in a crusade, make sure you really believe what it is you're telling the people, because it's your sincerity that will be one of the biggest factors that the Holy Spirit can use to convince them that this is the truth that they are hearing. As well, no matter what the topic is, whether you're in a home Bible study program or whether you're speaking in a public meeting, you always have to tie it to the cross, always have to tie it to born-again Christianity. Don't tell people it's wrong to drink. Tell them Jesus can save them from alcohol. Do you see the difference? That's what I'm talking about. You can even present doctrine in this way as well. As I've talked about on the testimony message that I've given here, that's how the Lord worked through Pastor Warman to teach me doctrine. He taught me basically that it's part of salvation. I saw that Sunday sacredness was not the truth. Therefore, it was an experience in salvation to be given the truth about the Sabbath. Jesus can save your friend or the audience that you're speaking to from the lies of spiritualism. He can save them from Ouija boards. He can save them from crystal balls. He can save them from the false appearances of Mary that Satan is putting on the world by the understanding of the truth about death. Do you see how a doctrine can go from being a rule to a living experience of faith? You have to present doctrine in that way. As you're sharing night after night, I would like to also encourage you to take an example from the world of sports. There's always two people who are covering the event. One is what's called the play-by-play person. He gives you the information, tells you exactly what's happening right then and there in the moment. But the second person gives what's called color commentary. That person is not talking about what's happening, but telling you more what it means. Rounding out the broadcast with interesting little stories and anecdotes about the history, about this person's previous statistics, about the sport itself, things like that. It may seem trivial, but it's actually very important, because the one telling you what's happening, but the other telling you what it means, gives you a full and complete understanding of what's going on that day. Please take that lesson and present subjects in Bible studies or in public evangelistic meetings the same way. Tell the people not only that the Pope is the Antichrist, but tell them the story of Satan's fall and how he was a usurper, and how anybody who tries to usurp anything in life is manifesting the spirit of the usurper, and that's what the Pope is doing. That's what makes him the Antichrist. That could also be in a marriage sermon. A wife who's challenging her husband's authority is manifesting the spirit of the usurper. A husband who is abusing his wife is manifesting the spirit of the tyrant. Satan is also a tyrant. Jesus loved the church more than the church loved him, and the husband has to love his wife more than she loves him. You see? So I hope that these things help you. I've got two thoughts on how to invite people to church. They may seem conflicting. I ask you to pray about them and ask God to guide you as to what's best for your situation. Evangelist Leo Screven, when he came to Calgary in 1995, he told me that what he does, he usually presents the Sabbath midweek. It's usually on a Wednesday night or something like that. And then on that first weekend, he doesn't give people any invitation to church. He lets them live their normal lives with the conscious thought that they're breaking the Sabbath, in the hopes they will be convicted and then come back and say, We want to keep the Sabbath. Where do we go to keep the Sabbath? And then he says, well, by the way, here's the sponsoring churches. You're invited to worship next weekend. But Lester Carney, successful evangelist as well, his format was the other way. He told me more in one-on-one Bible study situations, but I think it would apply to public meetings as well. What Lester said was, when you cover the topic of the Sabbath, you have to get the person to make a decision, to give it a try, and come to church right away. If not, when they don't and feel no ill effects, they're almost subconsciously making a decision against it. So I offer both pieces of advice. Again, please pray and may the Lord lead you as to what's best for you. Another important thing to consider as you are making your plan for your nightly program is when exactly to cover the subject of the beast and the Antichrist. You have to tailor-make your presentation plan for your audience. If you are living in a Catholic country where you have people who are in love with the Pope and do see him as God on earth, I think you probably would have a lot of people really mad at you if you did that on night number 3. You might want to save the name of the beast for a sermon right before the mark of the beast and just talk about general principles until then. That to me makes a lot of sense. However, if you're here in North America or in Western Europe, in Protestant areas of the world where people have bought into the lies of futurism and are waiting for things in prophecy that are never going to happen, it can be a very useful tool to bring out the beast early, because then it provides the contrast. Once people see the truth, then suddenly the lies they believe in will be self-exposed as lies. Those who want to cling to their lies will be weeded out right away and then won't cause any problems because they won't be there when you get to the meatier topics like the Sabbath and the fact that Sunday is the mark of the beast. If you're in a country that is not predominantly Christian, if you're working in Africa, you need to spend more time focusing on the fact that Christ came the first time, establishing him as the Savior of the world, as the Messiah who did die on the cross. Most of your audience in a place like North America is probably going to have already well believed that for a long time, or at least is really familiar with the concept, so you don't need to spend as much time. We had a situation a few years ago here in this area. A pastor decided to reuse his Africa sermons for a North American audience, and I remember one particular gentleman just telling me out and out he was bored because he'd already heard this before in his own church, so why should he come and hear it from us? You see, you need to keep your audience going. As well, one of the best things you can do is to, just like I said in Bible studies, open with some sort of overview. You want to hook the audience. Jesus told us we were fishers of men. How do fishermen catch fish? They use a hook, right? So you've got to hook their interest. Also, your speaking style is something you need to focus on. When you start out, especially on night number 1, you want to be a little more low-key in your preaching, not so demonstrative, not so authoritative. You start out more as a teacher. And then, this is the advice Kelly Schultz gave me. You start out as a teacher, then you become a teacher-preacher, then you become a preacher-teacher, and then by the end of the lectures, you are a preacher. And this builds up the interest level in the audience's mind, because what is the difference between preaching and teaching? Teaching is just telling people here's what it is, leaving them to decide for themselves, and they'll walk away and say, well, that was nice. But preaching is, this is truth, you need to take a stand for it. It's not that you need to be bombastuous, as Louis Torres once told me. It's not that you need to be like these guys on TV. It's just that you need to be firm and show that you really do believe what it is you're telling the people. That is the most important thing. I recommend giving the existing church members 1 or 2 sermons beforehand, some pointers, like to call them sermon etiquette. Things like don't get ahead of the speaker, or don't give too much away until the speaker does. You also want to make sure no one uses the name Ellen White at all during the entire series of the meetings. No one needs to know, because they will not understand. It's not lying, it's tactfulness, it's diplomacy. it's following her own advice, because the person is not the issue. The gift of the Spirit is the issue. So you want to be able to clearly tell people exactly how that works. You don't want any church members spoiling the surprise. I don't recommend chasing people who decide to walk out. I had a situation once watching a series of meetings that Randy Barber was doing. This was back in 1999, the first time I ever brought my friend Adrian to a series of meetings. And someone stood up, was vehemently opposed to everything he'd heard that night. It exposed the fact that all the futurist things that he believed in was a total and complete lie. He just didn't want to hear it. And then all these sincere, well-meaning Adventists crowded around him at the end of the night, trying to argue with him. And I just walked up to Randy and I said, you know, you've already told him everything from the front, right? There's nothing more that he can hear from any of them that's going to change his mind, is there? And Randy said, no, just give him time. God will give him another chance. He's had his whole world knocked out from underneath him. He just needs time. So that's how I feel. That's my recommendation for you. Again, pray about it. We always have this yearning that we want so much to win people, and we want so much to see those people come to Christ, but if they don't really want it, if they really do want to believe things that are not true, just remember, there's only 3 angels' messages. There's not 28 angels' messages, right? At some point, when we continue to argue with people, it's because we're only trying to be right, and we're trying to win the argument. And it's pride on our part. We have to be willing to let people go, and if there's any hope that they'll come back, it'll be our caring and our sincerity that will bring them back at that point. Now, as I mentioned in the Mentoring New Converts Part 1 lecture, Ian needs to be allowed to make his own decision on side issues. It's the same for people in the audience of an evangelistic series. Do not let any of your church members lead them astray on the raging debate issues that are going on right now, like the festival days or women's ordination. It doesn't matter if those church members are right about those issues or wrong. You see, the real problem is, once someone gets sidetracked onto a side issue, they no longer have that humble, teachable spirit. They're no longer reasoning from the Bible says, but they're reasoning from their own opinion. And it's me against you. And that kind of an attitude totally saps all the power that the Spirit is willing to offer to the group who's running the set of meetings. You want to weed out fanaticism. You want to be very clear that radical, fanatical Adventists are not welcome to bring their views to the new people, because it will spoil those precious, sincere souls. And that is not something that we can afford to do. No one can be won from the way of trying to win an argument. It's only winning souls. It's only winning friends that really counts. And ultimately, we're not there to get them to be like us. Just as I said last time, we're not there to get them to be conservative Adventists or liberal Adventists. We're just there to get them to be Adventists, to imitate Christ. We don't point to them and say, you know, come join us. We point to Jesus. And when they're pointing to Jesus, then we put the other arm around them and say, now that we're all pointing to Jesus, let's all come together as one under Jesus. That's the attitude we have to take when we run meetings. Now, as John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease. During the series, the evangelist will increase in the minds of the church members in the audience. The pastor will decrease. But as the meetings are winding to a close, it has to be the other way around. The human representative of God, who people see at the time, has to be the pastor. From that point on, the pastor is going to baptize the person. The pastor is going to be spending the next 3 to 5 years teaching and preaching the person in the church. So the evangelist has to fade out at that point. This is, to be honest, I don't fully know exactly what it means to say the evangelist has to fade out, but I do offer that advice to you. Again, I pray and ask that you pray that the Lord will help you to apply to what best meets your needs all the advice that we have given you today here in this lecture. And remember, most of all, the most important piece of advice I'd like to offer you: David could not fight wearing Saul's armor. You have to do what works for you.